Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to Ask an Expert with JustWorks. In the spirit of the Ask an Expert series, the first half of today's program, we will interview an expert in the space, and for the second half, we'll feature a live Q&A where you can ask the expert questions, which I will pose to him. I'm Moses Balian, HR consultant at JustWorks, and today's host. The topic of today's webinar is Fostering Employee Bonding Today and Tomorrow. Before I introduce our guest and we really dive in, just a few housekeeping details. So please note that your audio is muted by default so that we avoid any feedback, nothing personal. Questions, we received some upon registration, which are the first ones that we'll pose to our guest. And after that, we'll take some live Q&A. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and sent out to all registrants. So your friends who couldn't make it will still get to watch, along with any details for registering for upcoming webinars in the Ask an Expert series and beyond. Once again, and quickly our disclaimer, this material has been prepared for informational purposes only. We hope you will find it very informational, but please don't treat it as legal or tax advice. We trust you won't. Once again, I'm Moses Balian, SPHR, HR Consulting at JustWorks, and joining me today, Dan Manian, CEO of Donut. Welcome, Dan, and thank you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So before we dive in, let's talk about why you're the perfect person to be speaking on this topic today, what Donut is, and a little bit more about your background and your company's.
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder and CEO of Donut. We've been around for about 4 years, and our mission is to help create human connection within organizations to help foster community, collaboration, and camaraderie. I should also note, since our first paycheck, we have been happy JustWorks customers. So I'm excited to be collaborating with you on this. Donut works with an integration with Slack that allows you to run a variety of different programs to help people on your team get connected. We're used by over 12,000 organizations worldwide. And we'll talk about some of the different ways in which you can use Donut, but just to set some context, what you're looking at here on the left is the manner in which Donut introduces you to other people in your organization. We open up a multi-party direct message in Slack where you can schedule using one of our calendar integrations, meet on Zoom, and see a little bit about what you're meant to talk about. This is from our internal diversity, equity, and inclusion program at Donut, where we meet bi-weekly to discuss a different DEI topic.
That's really cool. Well, thanks for sharing that screenshot. Love Slack as a collaboration tool. My first experience was at JustWorks. Let me give a quick overview of what we'll cover today. What are companies doing now to encourage employee engagement and bonding? The second piece, Act 2, will be how to approach employee relations in the hybrid workforce, and then our long-awaited Q&A, which I keep mentioning. So let's begin with fostering employee bonding, both today and tomorrow. So let's address the elephant in the room right off the bat and talk about the new forced remote work landscape as a result of COVID.
Yeah, that has obviously changed a lot, if not everything, for most organizations. Prior to the remote, us all being forced remote, as you said, Donut was largely used to help folks meet new people in their organization, because even when you're in the same office, it's actually not that easy to build new relationships beyond your direct team, and that's something we can help with. However, the moment we were all remote in an instant, all of the ad hoc connections and relationship forming that happens, whether it's around the water cooler or at happy hours or just who you sit near to in the office, all of that just sort of evaporated instantaneously. And we have been inundated with folks looking for help for how to keep some of those bonds. You know, the person you might have seen every single day and had 30 seconds of conversation with in the morning and another minute in the afternoon is just gone, and maybe you haven't seen them in 3 weeks. So we've really seen people both feeling a lot more lonely, disconnected from the other people that they work with, and looking for ways to remedy that. So we'll talk more about how to do just that.
Yeah, awesome. About how to be a little bit more deliberate about these connections. I know I can say personally, my net is a lot smaller for humans I interact with at work on a day-to-day basis, but I do think those connections, fewer connections have deepened, which is cool in its own way. So let's
Yep.
move on to how we can provide multiple avenues for connections to meet employees where they're at.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think you mentioned that one of the things we have to do in this environment is just be a lot more deliberate, because in the office there's so much just ad hoc, incidental connection and interaction that happens. That's all gone away. One of the things that we've learned is there isn't really a cookie cutter, one size fits all for a particular organization in terms of how you can help people connect. There's a lot of different personality types, introverts to extroverts, different types of roles, different types of how people's days are structured. Are you on a sales team on calls all day? Are you an engineer coding all day? All of these different ways of working create different preferences for how people would like to connect. So one of the big things that you can do is actually provide a variety of different modalities, whether it's helping people connect one-on-one with new people or connect in small groups to discuss a particular topic. Some people prefer pure social time. Other people like to have some structured topic to discuss, like the DEI example I showed. So we've seen the most successful organizations with respect to bonding frequently are running multiple programs that allow for multiple modalities for people to participate in. Here are a few examples of the types of things we've been seeing folks running. I'll touch on just one or two of them, but of course we can talk about any of them more during the Q&A. We've seen a lot more teams interested in more frequent, shorter connections. Prior to remote work, people were often using Donut to meet somebody new once a week, once every other week, chat for a half hour. We now have teams that have a daily 10 or 15-minute conversation with someone on their direct team. They're not meeting someone new, but you're replacing that, office banter and chat with, let me, just see a different face every day and have a quick conversation. I gave the DEI discussion group example that we do at Donut, but we have a lot of customers doing something similar, where you're actually helping folks connect over a rich, meaningful, substantive topic and create some peer learning, sharing some perspectives, but doing that in a way that you're not keeping people within their bubble or clique if you have them. And actually you sort of alluded, Moses, to like you've gotten deeper relationships with your inner circle, probably because you see them on Zoom all the time, and so you're almost like in their home sometimes when you can see their room in your background. So actually I think one of the risks with remote work is you can have some more cliques that get even deeper because you're in your little bubble, and it's harder to break out of those because you don't have those opportunities.
Totally. Thanks. And I love your idea about a buddy system, not as much with new hires, but people who have been newly thrust into the work from home environment wouldn't have thought that that's what they would be doing, along with some veterans, which you might already have at your organization, sort of leveling that up a little bit. How can we take a new look at mentorship, sponsorship programs, and access to leadership for individual contributors and lower level managers?
Yeah, so I think the mentorship and sponsorship one is a really, really important one, especially through the lens of building a more equitable workplace. It's much more likely for leaders left, just human nature, to gravitate towards mentoring people that remind them of themselves. And we all know about the inequity and disparity and lack of diversity at the leadership level. So that can be a self-perpetuating thing if you don't make it more intentional. So by setting up a more deliberate mentorship program where you're matching people not based upon who reminds them of themselves, but what people can offer from a mentorship and where people want to up level, whether it's career coaching, whether it's a specific skill set. Maybe someone wants to learn more about data science or up level their public speaking, and there's experts in your organization that can do that. I think peer learning programs can be really powerful because most people in your organization actually probably have something they can teach someone else and also have something that they can learn from lots of other people.
So lateral mentorship is what I mean.
Yeah. So it can go both ways. I mean, you can create a executives or leaders mentoring people earlier in their career, but you can also have the lateral, and maybe someone on the engineering team is interested in learning more about product management and being able to pair those folks up and give them that avenue as well.
And they say you learn something the best or the most deeply by teaching it. So this has myriad benefits for beneficiaries on both sides.
Yes, that is definitely true.
Was this laundry with executives sounds kind of fun? I can picture what that's like. And daily prompts, what do you mean by that? That sounds like something I did in my 6th grade English class, but I bet it's more robust than that.
Yeah. So we one of the things we saw pretty quickly is everybody in this environment has some sort of loss of social interaction that's driving some loneliness. At the same time, a lot of us have Zoom fatigue, and we're like looking at the screen all day, and it's like, I can't do another Zoom meeting. So you sort of have this paradox of how can we promote connection while not cramming everybody's calendars with Zoom meetings. So one of the things that we started doing at Donut, just with our own team, and then we've now productized and is an early access, is a way to set up a Slack channel that will prompt some social conversation right in Slack. So actually, I have an example of this, what this looks like on the next slide, where we will have a question like, what's the most beautiful place you've ever been? And then people reply in Slack with a vacation picture. You can see people threaded off of it and ask questions about what Machu Picchu is like in this example. We've actually had some new hires join Donut recently, and they actually said just being in this channel and participating really helped them get a feel for the personalities of the people on the team. Some of the things that you might learn just having lunch with team members that doesn't happen as easily when you're remote, they got to get that window. And I've learned things about people on my team that I've been working with for years through this really simple, much more asynchronous friendly, because time zones is another enormous challenge with remote work. So this also levels that playing field a little bit as you get this conversation going kind of throughout the day.
Totally. One through line I'm hearing here is just being deliberate. It feels a little awkward, but it's an awkward time where we've got to just be purposeful about our communications, even these. So as far as garnering buy-in, any tips for actually getting employees engaged and participating in the events you plan?
Yeah. So I think there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for what you should be doing. So a lot of listening in terms of what your employees want to be doing, but then I think it's really crucial for all these examples I'm giving that employees have the option to opt in. And actually, the default we've learned it's better to let people opt in versus opting them in and letting them opt out.
Got it.
If they decide to step into it and come themselves, they're going to be a lot more bought in. Sometimes that means maybe a program will start smaller than you'd hope. But if there's a channel like this and people are having a good time, the word will slowly get out, and it's a little bit more organic and bottoms up rather than a leadership team saying, hey, everybody, we're going to do this. Please have fun. So yeah, that's.
And then it'll hopefully gain some steam. Totally.
Exactly.
Speaking of buying in, this might be a stretch, but let's talk about the hybrid workforce where we've had some employees buy in to coming back into the physical working environment, but we still have some working remotely. That presents unique challenges because it's a little different than when everyone's remote, right? We're sort of all in the same different place. So how does this split environment change social interaction?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be much harder, maybe counterintuitively, because if you go back to the office, it should be easier. But I think you run the risk of creating the in crowd and the out crowd. And some people get the advantages of the office and forming those tighter bonds, and other people are left out. So there's some, I think, operational, pretty straightforward tips and things that I think we'll start to employ. We're still all remote, but for example, if one person is on Zoom, everybody should be on Zoom. Being that one person on the webcam when 4 people are in front of a real whiteboard
Like within their own computer, like on
with their
Zoom.
own computer,
Yeah.
exactly. Their own computer, own camera, own
Oh,
mic. Because when everybody's in a Zoom meeting, you're all in it together, and you have to figure out how to make that meeting work in a digital fashion. When you're the odd person out, it can really feel excluding. But I think in terms of relationship building, a lot of the things we already talked about, building those muscles now and then keeping them going, I think will be really, really important. So making sure that the remote friendly modalities of bonding aren't just left to the wayside when it's
mm,
possible for the 20 people in the office to have a happy hour, right? Like if we just
right.
all go back to office happy hours instead of that, we're going to be leaving a lot of people out.
And these relationships have tremendous morale and engagement consequences. But next level, they also have some professional development and opportunity implications as well. So, how can we, for our own liability and the good of our workforce, remain inclusive amidst this environment?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the out of sight, out of mind is a perfect example. So in the long run, what we want to avoid is that the people that are in the office are more likely to be promoted or more likely to be thought of for that big project that is going to be the opportunity that leads to promotion. And number one, it's not fair to the remote people. But number two, you're doing your organization disservice because the best person to give that opportunity, the most qualified person, might not be the person in the room. They might be the person working remotely. So that means it's going to be imperative to create equal opportunities, and really those opportunities often stem from relationships, right? Like who are you thinking of? Who do you have trust with? Who do you trust to take on this big project, right? That's the person you're going to give it to, and you're going to trust the people that you have deeper relationships with. So I think while doing a coffee roulette program maybe doesn't feel like it's directly impacting work, but in the long run, it really does drive who has those opportunities, how does that make your organization perform, and are you being equitable in terms of who's having those opportunities to rise through the ranks.
Wow, there's an actual business case for that. In HR, I coined the expression never mistake um, charisma for competence.
Hmm.
And I think that can be extended to this example, whereas there's a natural charisma to being present with someone. But let's like really look at the results and the qualifications. Great, thanks, Dan. The moment we've all been waiting for, we're going to ask the expert. So we got some great Q&A come in from registrants in advance. So we put those on slides, and I'd love to pose some of those to you now. While live Q&A comes trickling in, please use the Q&A feature, and I will select some of those to field to Dan after these first three. So one is, how do you create a culture strategy for a remote workforce?
Yeah. This is a great question, and we had an office before the pandemic hit, so we went through this transition as well. I think the way we thought about it is what's working about our culture today? What are the really bedrock values and things that we want to keep? And then what are the rituals and institutions that are maybe representations of it in our in-office environment that are just not going to be possible, but we need to figure out what the new rituals are and what the new institutions are that we create to deliver that same culture. I think for any organization, I actually think of relationships and connections as the way culture gets transmitted, right? That's you see people living the values, you see people rewarding the good behaviors, right, that are part of your culture. So there's some cultural loss if those transmitters stop working, and the culture stops spreading. But specifically, one of the things that we did is we actually took the whole team and said, what's working about our culture? What do we want to change about it? What are the opportunities now that we're remote? We actually built a culture roadmap where we created some goals and had different folks on the team take on different initiatives that we thought collectively were really important. From how do we transition some of the in-office perks to being remote work
Mm.
perks? What kinds of cultural glue work exists in a remote organization, and how do we spread that around? So I think it requires being really deliberate, but breaking down what's the core thing you want to keep, and then how do we build the remote version of that.
Wow, I really want to underscore what you said about how you can't just write down culture and slap it on a poster, especially now. It has to be propagated through shared and repeated behaviors and norms. And like you said, rewarding behavior that's aligned with your values. So, wow, big question. Thanks for tackling that, Dan.
Yep.
Number two is how can you foster bonding between teams who are in different countries where there's huge difference in not just time zone, but culture?
Yeah. Um, it's a great question, and it's one that a lot of global organizations deal with. I think um, I don't have a cookie cutter answer there, except ask and listen. Like really try to understand the different culture, whatever the two or more cultures that you are trying to create bonding between. Um, Ask folks how they connect and what some of their norms are, and make sure you're listening to both sides of that equation and trying to help people meet in the middle on some level.
Just ask, right? Because just an example, I know chat has gained a lot of traction, whether it's Slack or Microsoft Teams or what have you in the US, whereas other business environments that have maybe remained a little more formal might email might be king. So yeah, just ask.
Yep.
Cool. And you already talked about garnering buy-in and good participation, but how do you encourage that participation in employee bonding? Or if you have some employees who are just kind of not into it, maybe they're still doing good work, but not really into participating, how can we spur engagement there?
Yeah. I think um, the couple things that come to mind are one, making sure there's visibility in the programs that are happening and that people can see the outcomes. We actually run a selfie contest for our donut meetings internally where when people meet for just one of our donut meetings, we'll take a screenshot of the Zoom and repost it in Slack and react. So there's actually like quite a bit of visibility around like people are having fun with this. Okta's CEO runs a CEO roulette program. He tweeted about it and like shared about how people are participating in it, right? So like you're not forcing people to participate, but you're making sure it's top of mind and people are seeing there's something happening here that you might want to get involved in.
Like maybe you want to incite a little FOMO, right? I mean, when others see people having fun, they want to join.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, let's take us off screen share and really dig into the live Q&A that's come through. Oh, I love this one already. Okay, so Jose Leal asks, companies are focused on ergonomic safety and productivity, but overlooking the value of bonding. So this is great. This is like, we're not presupposing the premise here. This is for a company who maybe isn't on the bonding train and not even trying yet to get employees engaged. How do you advocate for the value of bonding, especially as teams are still getting comfortable in the remote environment?
Yeah. So I think about this as sort of a two-step answer. First, there's the value to the employee, and then there's the company value. And one actually drives the other. But there's a plethora of stats for both, but just to cite a couple, one study showed that employees who have a best friend at work are 7 times more likely to be engaged. So think about if you join a new company right now, how much harder is it to make a best friend when you're not actually meeting anybody in person, right? But this is like a really, really powerful engagement lever. So that's one example, but there's many examples about how bonding and connections drive employee engagement and also drive employee happiness. Then taking that up to the company level, there are tons of stats around how much more successful companies are who have engaged employees. So one study said that companies with engaged employees outperform those without them by 200%. So this actually then comes up into a company performance, productivity, and there's a lot of different levers in between there that's driving that. Things like retention get boosted when you have connected and engaged employees, and retention, obviously there's enormous costs when you lose a productive employee. So there's a lot to draw on there, but I think the short version is more engaged, happier employees. So they're going to be happier, they're going to be more productive, and then that drives company performance.
And the stats are out there too. I mean, metrics driven. If it improves retention and it improves engagement and productivity, you really can't argue with that. So whoever's asking the question or in that position, whether you're an HR professional or an individual contributor, maybe do your best to formulate a data driven plan or evidence for why this is so important. So best of luck out there. Great. I wanted to field Erica's question. So she says, we're a relatively small agency, 2 offices in 2 countries. How can we scale down the methods or messages suggested here so that it's not strange for someone? Especially some of our staff are remote and some are in office. So it sounds like at least her feeling was that a lot of these are more effective at scale. How do you avoid the awkward, like, oh, there's only 3 people at this party dynamic?
Yeah, yeah. So we're about a dozen people at Donut, and we do a lot of these things. And we have plenty of, 10-person companies that are using Donut in a lot of these ways. Now, I gave a lot of examples of different types of programs you can run. A 10-person organization is probably not running 10 different programs. They're probably starting with one simple either coffee roulette or lunch roulette type of a program. But we found when we flipped from being in person to remote that we increased the frequency of, we do trios. So, different mixture of 3 people on the team, and we all know each other, but we don't have those in-office conversations. So to meet with a different random trio every week and just catch up and hear how people's lives are has been really invaluable for us. But like I said, depending on your organization, you might want a purely social one. You might want to give folks a prompt that's a little bit more work related. But at a size of 25 people, I would recommend get a little feel for what people in your organization would prefer, get a general preference of how people would like to connect, and launch one program and kind of start from there.
Like, this is where we're starting out. That makes total sense. This is a tough one. Brianna asks, how can you acknowledge and address a drop in morale that might be tied to larger societal issues? So I guess it's fun to talk about Machu Picchu, even though none of us are traveling right now, but what about these big questions that are really impacting us personally and occupying a lot of our attention?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something we're all dealing with now. I guess I can just speak to how we've tried to address that. We have a bi-weekly all hands. When something big is going on in the world, we talk about it and acknowledge it. We don't shy away from it. See, I don't have the solutions to all the world's problems, but just by making sure people know that I know and the whole company understands that there's a lot of tough things going on in the world right now. Telling people it's okay if you need to take a day off or a week off. We have some employees in California that are near fires, and
Right.
they need to know it's okay if they have to evacuate their home, that yeah, sure, take a week off. And I think just by raising these issues in an all hands, making sure the organization knows that the leadership team is thinking about these things is one way to bring light to that. And then I think I gave the DEI example. We were already running a DEI program before George Floyd's murder and everything that's happened since then. But we did focus in more on racial injustice in terms of the topics we were looking at after that happened, since it was something that our whole team felt really deeply and wanted to engage in. So in that instance, we were giving folks the forum in those small groups to have deeper conversations if they wanted to opt in and do that.
Carving out that space. That's
Yeah.
great. I mean, I have 2 thoughts. A, these conversations are probably going to happen in the workplace anyway. May as well sanction them.
Yep.
And B, let's not pretend that these things aren't happening. I mean, work can be a nice break from life sometimes, but there's so many issues that are just imposing themselves upon our lives that it only makes sense to air them out at work too. Great. Dan, thank you. We're at time. I just want to thank you so much for your time and your expertise and allowing us all to benefit from that. Also, a few Q&A questions came in about using Donut itself, which I'm thrilled to see. So those details will be included in our follow-up email to all registrants. Just more information about Donut if you were intrigued by what you saw today. So again, Dan, founder and CEO of Donut, thank you so much for joining us, really.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Great. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe and be well. Thank you.